The Big 12 football media poll came out yesterday, and my West Virginia Mountaineers found themselves at the very bottom of that poll. And I'm having trouble wrapping my head around why in the world that would happen. And I'm going to make an argument as to why there's no way that should be the case. And I'm going to bring on a special guest to talk about it with me. So pull up a chair, sit back, relax, and let's talk about it right after a word from our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive, where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing, only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you. What is up, college sports fans, Big 12 fans, and fellow members of Mountaineer Nation, and welcome in to another edition of Couz's Corner. Pull that chair up and let me serve you up this shot of top shelf college football content. On tap today, we are once again talking about the Big 12 preseason media poll. I did do a live stream about it with Josh Neighbors and my good friend Mountaineer Paul. Josh Neighbors, you can find him over at the Crystal Ball College Football Channel, which is part of the 365 Sports Network. He has his own show called the Neighborhood Watch that appears on that channel. And then obviously you can find Mountaineer Paul over at Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. But we talked about the entirety of the poll. What I wanted to focus on in this episode is why in the world West Virginia was picked to finish last, because I'm scratching my head and cannot figure out why. I just don't think it makes any sense. And I'm going to tell you why I don't think it makes sense. And then I'm going to bring on a guest who actually voted in this poll and had West Virginia last. And I want to get his perspective, someone from the outside with an objective opinion, and see why he thinks West Virginia is indeed going to be the worst team in the Big 12 in 2023. So, first, let me give you my reasoning as to why I think it's absolutely crazy. Now, I'm not saying West Virginia should be at the top of the conference or even the top half of the conference, but the fact that they were picked to finish last below all four of the incoming teams is baffling to me. Now, I would probably have them sitting somewhere around 10th or 11th in my poll if I was going to do one, but not 14th, man. I mean, and let's take a look at why. I'm going to compare West Virginia to the three incoming schools, and you tell me how West Virginia's last. First, let's look at West Virginia. They returned 13 starters from last year's team. And I get it, it's not a lot. But let's face it, they were a 5-7 team. So it's not like all the starters they lost were highly productive anyway. For example, they lost quarterback JT Daniels. Well, JT Daniels did not even finish the season as a starting quarterback. He got benched in favor of Garrett Green, who, oh, by the way, started 3 games. West Virginia won 2 of those games. Now, obviously, Nico Marchiol was a big part of that last game against Oklahoma State. He came in relief of Green after he got injured. But West Virginia finished 2-1 after benching JT Daniels. So losing him was not that big of a loss. And maybe the media looks at this situation and says, okay, West Virginia is going to have an inexperienced quarterback starting the season. Even if it's Garrett Green, he only has 3 starts under his belt. Not a lot of experience as a starter. You know, it's a whole lot different story when you are the guy going into game 1. I get that. And if it's Nico, if Nico wins the job, he's never started before. He's a redshirt freshman. So maybe they're looking at that, you know. And then when you look at schedule-wise, West Virginia does play 5 of their Big 12 conference games on the road. However, 2 of those are against 2 of the newcomers, Houston and UCF. They also play BYU and Cincinnati at home, so they play all 4 of the newcoming members of the Big 12. They don't have to play K-State, who was picked to finish second in this poll, and they don't have to play Texas, who was picked to win the Big 12 in 2023. So they avoid 2 of the top teams in the league and play all 4 newcomers. To me, that's pretty advantageous to West Virginia. Now, let's compare them to the 4 new teams. Let's look at UCF first. UCF does return a couple more starters than West Virginia. They returned 15 starters from last year's team. But they were starters who, for the most part, were recruited to play in the American Conference. Yes, these UCF, BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati knew in the summer of 2021 they were coming to the Big 12. But they've only had 1.5 recruiting cycles, basically, to recruit Big 12 talent. So most of their veteran players were recruited to play the American Conference. Each team has some transfers coming in. I get all that. But still, I don't think top to bottom these rosters are going to be built, at least not the ones from the American Conference, are going to be built to play a Power 5 schedule week in, week out. Now, UCF does return John Rice Plumlee at quarterback, who's a really good football player. Not a great passer, but he's a good runner, and he's just a good football player. He's a gamer. He's what I like to call a gamer. And he has experience playing in Power 5 because he did transfer to UCF from Ole Miss. So it won't be too big for him. UCF's schedule does include only 4 home games, just like West Virginia. So there again, UCF doesn't have an advantage there. And they, like WVU, do avoid Texas. However, they do have to play K-State and Oklahoma in their conference slate. So there again, UCF's conference schedule to me is tougher than West Virginia's. Or at least it could be argued that it's tougher. It's definitely not any easier. Now let's look at BYU. BYU returns 15 starters from last year's team. However, they lost their starting quarterback, Jaron Hall, and they replaced him with Keaton Slovis. Now that might sound great on the surface because Keaton Slovis was a star when he was at USC a couple of years ago. However, when you look at Slovis's stats from last year when he played for Pitt, he only completed 58% of his passes, had a QBR of 46.8, which was 94th in the country. Okay. And he threw 10 TDs, but 9 picks. So Keaton Slovis did not set the world on fire at Pitt last year. So if BYU expects to win, they better hope he steps up and plays a lot better than he did last season. Again, BYU, just like West Virginia, just like UCF, has to play 5 Big 12 road games. They have to travel all the way across the country to Morgantown to play West Virginia, and they play both Oklahoma and Texas. They are the only new incoming member who has to play both of those schools. So they have a really, really tough conference schedule. Now, they do avoid playing K-State, but other than that, their schedule, their Big 12 schedule is brutal. And they do, like I said, they have to travel all the way across the country to Morgantown. Now, when you look at Houston, they also only return 12 starters, so not a lot of starters coming back, which is one less than West Virginia. And they lost, listen to this, they lost their starting quarterback in Clayton Tune, their starting running back, Alton McCaskill, who transferred out and ended up at Colorado, and their star wide receiver, Tank Dell. Dell and Tune both went to the NFL. They're relying on Donovan Smith, the transfer quarterback from Texas Tech, who's been injury prone. He's not proven he can stay healthy for an entire season. They only play 4 of their Big 12 games on the road, and they avoid Oklahoma. However, they do still have to play Texas, but it is at home, so that is one advantage. Get this. Houston only leaves the state of Texas twice the entire season, and that's the 2 games against UCF and K-State. Now, when you look at their conference schedule, you could say they have a slight advantage maybe over West Virginia. But let's face it, guys. Houston has not been recruiting great as far as their high school talent. They have gotten some pretty good transfers in, including some guys with Power 5 experience, but their roster is not going to be deep enough to play a Power 5 schedule week in, week out, in my opinion. So the fact they were picked ahead of West Virginia is baffling to me. I don't get it. I absolutely don't get it. And then last, we've got Cincinnati. First of all, Cincinnati's breaking in a brand new coach in Scott Satterfield. Yes, Scott Satterfield has coached Power 5 football, but he hasn't coached this team. They lose Luke Fickell, who was arguably, I don't even know if it's arguable, one of the best coaches in all of college football. For Scott Satterfield, who in my opinion is a downgrade. I'm sorry, but he is. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I think Scott Satterfield is a big downgrade from Luke Fickell. Now, if Luke Fickell were still the coach, I would have absolutely no issue picking Cincinnati ahead of West Virginia for that alone, because I think he's that good of a coach. But here's the thing. He's not back. And you know who else isn't back for Cincinnati? Most of their starters. You know how many starters they're returning for 2023? 9. That's it. Single digits. 9 starters returning off Cincinnati's team from last season. That's it. They do have Emory Jones transferring in from Arizona State at the QB position, who could be good, but he's been sporadic over his career. He's not been real consistent. Their schedule also only includes 4 Big 12 road games, but one of those, they have to go all the way to Provo, Utah to play BYU. Now, they do avoid Texas, they do avoid K-State, and they do avoid TCU. And they get OU at home, so that's one advantage. They have to play OU, but it is at home. So you could say Cincinnati might have the easiest path of all these teams I've talked about as far as their schedule. It does line up pretty well, but I just don't see a Cincy team losing that many pieces from last year's roster, plus a new coach, and being better than WVU. It absolutely makes no sense to me. And I want you guys, someone to educate me in the comment section. How in the world could the Big 12 media people have chosen this? Now, I know I'm probably looking at this with gold and blue glasses on, and I get that. So that's the reason I decided to bring on somebody as a guest so I can get both sides of the argument. I want to hear it from somebody who actually voted West Virginia last in this poll. Ladies and gentlemen, here I am with Phillip with the 1012 Podcast Network. You can find him on Twitter at 1012 Network. When I saw this Big 12 media poll come out, and I went on Twitter right away and I said, look, I need somebody who voted in this poll to come on my show and explain their reasoning why West Virginia was placed last. Because as I sit here with gold and blue glasses on, I can't wrap my head around it. So, Phillip, first of all, before we get into your reasoning here, just let everybody know where they can find you on social media, what platforms they can find you on and that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm the host of the 1012 podcast. We are the podcast that covers now all 14 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We have a full podcast network called the 1012 Network, where we have shows that represent most of the schools in the new Big 12. Working on a couple of schools we don't have, and we've got a few, I think, announcements coming later this summer. But we've got a great collection of shows, 1012network.com, TEN12, the word network. You can find every show there, links to all of them. I hope you all go and check it out, including our West Virginia show. I'm sure most of you fans are aware of Raspy Voice Kids, who we are thrilled to have Jeremy and Brandon as part of the network. They do an incredible job covering West Virginia. Thrilled to have them.
They absolutely do. Actually, I love those guys. Great West Virginia fans and great dudes. Which is even better. But just real quick, Phillip, I appreciate you answering my tweet yesterday very quickly, actually, and I want you to explain to me, but as I sit here, a West Virginia fan, like I said, I just can't figure out why all four of the new schools are getting put in front of West Virginia in this poll. And can you give me that from your perspective as someone who voted in this and it's not a West Virginia fan?
Yeah, and yes, I did submit a ballot. I did have West Virginia last in my ballot, and there's a couple of different things about this as to why that is. One. Maybe I feel like I got a little burned by West Virginia, personally biased standpoint. I got burned a little bit by West Virginia last year. I thought that they would have a better year. I thought that they would, especially start the year better. And it's hard to come away from last season with West Virginia and feel like there's momentum. I mean, you're coming off a year where great for getting that 5th win over an Oklahoma State team who at that point was, kind of weakened at Bernie's it a little bit, just kind of limping to the finish line. And West Virginia was just slightly better than a beaten and battered Oklahoma State team. So they were able to get that 5th win. It sure felt great. Then you go to an off season and they lost again for another year, another off season where you lost more to the portal than I feel like they brought in. There is talent on this roster. Don't get me wrong. I'm working on, we'll do our position group rankings like we always do. We're going to do offensive line. And I like West Virginia's offensive line this year. I think it should be solid. But you take the fact that I just don't have a lot of confidence in the roster and the depth of the roster. And so that's number one. And so I look at West Virginia's roster and the depth and there's talent on the team. Let me emphasize this. Right. But there's talent on Cincinnati's team. There's talent on Houston's team. There's talent on BYU's team. There's talent on UCF's team. And so if we're going to talk about this in comparison to the 4 incoming schools, I don't think West Virginia's roster is significantly better than those 4 right now. So you take that, number one. Okay. Number 2 is this. Nobody has a more difficult schedule in the Big 12 than West Virginia. Like every metric says West Virginia's schedule is the most difficult that I've seen. I've seen some point out Texas because of Alabama on the schedule and because of some of the teams in the Big 12 they play, but Texas leaves the state of Texas twice all year. Once to go to Alabama in September and once to go to Iowa State in November. West Virginia with Pitt, who I think is going to be better than most people expect this year. I was really down on them last year. I think they'll be better than maybe expected this year, but I know, better than expected is saying like, maybe 2 spots finish better. And a Penn State team who's people are very, very high on, and we can set the whole like Penn State overrated Big Ten, whatever aside. Like it's going to be a really good Big Ten team.
Right.
And so you've got to start the year with 2 games that are going to be physically tough.
Okay.
And then you go into a Big 12 schedule that I think is actually fairly difficult. Now, look, West Virginia avoids preseason number 1 in Big 12 Texas. They don't have to play Texas, or they don't get to play Texas, I guess, is one way you kind of look at it. Mm-hmm. But look at who else they have on the schedule. See, number 2 in the preseason was Kansas State. They avoid them. That's nice. That's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, they're on the schedule. Texas Tech, they're on the schedule. TCU, they're on the schedule. You go to who are the rest of was it the top ones are then Baylor, Oklahoma State, and UCF. Let's
Yes.
see. Going through Kansas schedule, we've got Baylor, Oklahoma
Yep.
State, and UCF. So while you avoid the top two in the conference, you're based off of preseason expectations in conference play. You're also avoiding a lot of the teams at the bottom. You're getting a lot of that 3 through 10 mix. You got Cincinnati in there. And that should be an interesting game. And so you look at the schedule that West Virginia has to play this year. That is not a schedule that you want to have to play when you're in a make or break situation and you just don't, and a schedule where it's not like it gets easy on the back end. You get BYU in November, that should be helpful. You get Oklahoma, and if Oklahoma's playing like people think they will, that's going to be a tough game. You get Cincinnati at home, and then you go to Waco to end the year. Like you combine all those things. So you get the roster concerns I have. You take the schedule concerns I have from a strength of schedule. Like those two things played a big part. Now let's throw in the last thing. And I'm going to use my phone here while we do this because I want to make sure I get the info right. Shout out to Kelly Ford, K4 Ratings on Twitter. If y'all don't know who he is, I think most people do at this point and should.
Probably so.
I'm going to read this tweet verbatim. He's got the graphic. Y'all can go see K4 Ratings. He's got on there. No team faces a tougher collection of opposing FBF offenses than West Virginia. The Mountaineers' FBS opponents in 2023 have an average national offensive unit rank of 31.2. Wow. That is the best collection of offenses in the country that any Power 5 team, any FBS team is going to face this year. Are we all suddenly expecting West Virginia's defense to take some like massive step up into like top 20 in the country? Because I'm not. And so all of these things combined, both I think they are less talented than they were from a depth standpoint. And you have a very difficult schedule in Big 12 play, combined with a very difficult non-conference schedule, combined with the level of offenses you're going to be facing on a week in, week out situation. I just have a lot of concerns about West Virginia. On the flip side, and I'm going long here, but you mentioned in comparison to, because we're talking about this as a debate with the 4 incoming schools, right?
Right. That's my biggest debate. Yeah. I have no issue with them being ranked below anybody else in the conference, honestly.
On strength of schedule, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma are one of the easiest. If you want to include everything, including non-con, Oklahoma State has the easiest schedule in the country or in the Big 12. Oklahoma's down there. So does Cincinnati and UCF because of who all they have on the schedule. So does Houston. Now, I don't think those teams are particularly going to be great this year because I think they're going to struggle on the back end of the schedule, as most G5 to P5 teams do, although it's hard historically to figure this out because the last time we had a major realignment like this, there was no NIL, there was no immediate eligibility and transfer portal situation. But I think they all have easier schedules. And I think they have easier schedules on the front end to prepare themselves that they might be able to manage the back half of their schedule despite having the depth of talent of a Power 5 team yet. West Virginia's schedule is not there. What's the easiest stretch?
The back half when we play all 4 newcomers in the last 7 weeks of the season.
And that could help West Virginia. That could make the difference because I think the back half is where those 4 incoming teams are going to struggle. And then the last thing is just like, look, picking them 4th doesn't mean that they're going to be like 2 wins lower than everybody else. Like the difference between 14th place and 9th place this year might be 1 game and tiebreakers.
Right. Good point.
But you put all those things together because I think some of this is like when we rank things 1 through 14, like I like tier ranking better because I think tier ranking better shows you like the distance between 1 and 4 might be the same as the distance between 5 and 14, right?
Right.
And so tiering things up, but I still have West Virginia at the bottom because I think this schedule and the offenses that they're going to have to face and the concerns I have with the depth on the roster, the turnover they've had there, just all of those things combined, and a head coach that how long is West Virginia going to give him before they pull the rug out if the season goes poorly?
I was wondering how long you were going to wait before you mentioned that because I figured that would be the first thing you said, to be honest.
Well, if they go 1 and 2, if they go 1, like you open the Penn State, I'm putting an L there. You get Duquesne. Okay, there's your win. You've got Pitt at home, and you got Texas Tech at home.
Yeah.
At what point does Ren Baker go, We've seen enough. We appreciate it. We one of the reasons we kept you was to not pay the buyout, what as expensive as it was, and to put ourselves at the beginning of earlier this season, be one of the first to market to find a new head coach. And if that happens, what happens to this roster and the team the rest of the way? So
yeah, it makes sense. I get it. And that's all fair. And I appreciate you bringing up the points. One thing I had not heard said yet in my debates with people online and everything else is how the front half of the schedule, even though it's non-conference, can impact the rest of the schedule because they'll be so beat up. Guys could get injured, all those things. I had not really thought about that piece of it because when I heard that argument, I'm like, but this is about the Big 12 schedule. It has nothing to do with the out-of-conference schedule, right? And when you look at our Big 12 only schedule, it's not one of the hardest won schedules. We don't have the easiest maybe, but we also don't have the hardest because we do have the 4 incoming members, and we're only one of a couple teams that have that. And we don't play K-State. We don't play Texas. But we do play 5 road games, which has not been Neal Brown's best trait. He's not very good on the road. But there again, 2 of those are at Houston and UCF. So, could that balance out? Who knows? But my argument was when you look at what they have coming back, I mean, Cincinnati, for example, only has 9 starters coming back from last year's team. Plus, they're breaking in a new coach.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Scott Satterfield. To me, going from Luke Fickell to Scott Satterfield is a major downgrade. And no disrespect to Scott Satterfield, but Luke Fickell is a superstar coach in my opinion. And if Luke Fickell were still at Cincinnati, I would automatically put Cincinnati ahead of us, no questions asked, because he's that good of a coach, in my opinion. But with the change of coach and losing 9 guys, Emory Jones is probably going to be the starter. He's inconsistent. So what do they have? That's my thing. And yeah, we lost some guys, but we didn't lose as much production this year as we did last year to the portal. Our biggest loss obviously was Dante Steele to graduation. But when you look at overall the production and the amount of snaps we lost this year, it's not near as bad as it was last year. And I think now this is all a conjecture because we don't know, but the talent they brought in this year from the portal appears, at least on paper, to be better than the talent we brought in last year from the portal. So, we'll see if that pans out. I know I just actually got through reading an article before we got on the air. Neal Brown admitted in a recent interview with one of the West Virginia media guys, it was a 24/7 sports guy actually, Mike Casaza, that he missed last year on they were really, really small. Did you see the article in Athlon magazine comparing West Virginia's defense to a MAC team?
I have not read that one. You'll have to send me the link. And I got an argument with West Virginia fans last year about how much they pulled in out of the portal. And I'm like, here the thing that I have heard that has stuck with me about the transfer portal is this. A successful transfer portal class has a 50% success rate. That means that if however many players you bring in from the portal, the bigger the worse it's going to be to me. Because if half of those guys work out in the way you need them to, that's successful. Because you have to think about all the things that go into it.
Yeah.
You're getting acclimated to the system, adjusting to it being in a new place, adjusting to a new team, learning the way things go. If you're coming up a level or 2, if you're coming from FCS, that takes time to acclimate. Like it's not a plug and play situation with transfer portal. It's not. And I'm thinking like I had FCS, there were FCS guys coming out of the portal last year and I had West Virginia fans who were like, no, you got this guy I don't care what he did at North Dakota State. Maybe he'll come and be awesome at West Virginia and play like a P5 player. Maybe that's what he will do. But you're banking a lot on guys coming up a level and immediately being as good as the other Power 5 players who've been playing at a Power 5 level multiple seasons and practicing against Power 5 players in multiple seasons. And so, like, if some of these transfers pan out, that's great. But if you've got a bunch of transfers who are first year or second year and just aren't doing, that's a concern. Look,
and that's fair. That's very fair.
Is it? Could West Virginia finish 12th? Absolutely. Or 11th. Yeah. Are West Virginia fans mad that West Virginia got picked last? Like, I think it's like at some point we're picking nits here. We're like, well, we should have been 12th. Like, okay, that's still probably 5, 7, 4, and 8.
Yeah.
Like that's still not making a bowl game and that's still looking for a new head coach. Yeah. And so like, I get if you want to be upset that West Virginia, an established Power 5 program, was picked behind 4 G5s who are on the come up. When they're going to play all 4 of those, I get it. And because they play all 4, I think it gives West Virginia an opportunity. Do I think Cincinnati could have a better year than people think in year 1, but long term, I don't like Satterfield? Absolutely. Do that high on Houston? No. Like, I'm not. Like, would it shock me if West Virginia finished 11th? No. That would be fine, because I think there's a tier from about 10 through 14 that it's like, put them in whatever order you want. Those are the teams that I think those last 5 teams are all going to kind of be in that last 5, that bottom 4th tier. And West Virginia is just the one where that schedule with the non-con that they have to play, I don't think they're set up for success. I don't think this is not, if you're Neal Brown, this is not the schedule you want to have.
No, he's actually talked about that too. He's not happy about it either, and neither is the new AD for that matter. But it's what they've got, right?
Now I'll say this: if he beats Pitt in week 3, he will. Correct me if I'm wrong. He will buy himself a lot long. If he loses, man, he's got two till the idle week, just to make sure you kind of got things, or the next week. If he beats Pitt, he might buy himself deep into the season just off that one alone.
Yeah.
But if you're West Virginia, we've seen it. We've seen it from Power 5 teams. They're making firings earlier in the year to get themselves into the hiring and reviewing process earlier. And I just, like, I don't love that. I don't understand. Like, if you wanted to, like, I get it. You're saving money as much money as West Virginia owes Neal Brown, which that contract extension was insane. But, like, I think there are so many factors for West Virginia to go into. People have just been like, I think this is going to be the worst team. Mm-hmm. And I think with the other 4, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And
that's all fair. I mean, it's all fair criticisms. And one thing I didn't hear you mention, I want to ask your opinion on. I didn't hear you mention the fact they're going to be breaking in a basically new starting quarterback, essentially. Even though if Garrett Green gets the job, he does have starting experience, but he's never been the guy going into the year, which is a whole different level of expectations.
Yeah.
Do you think, did that also play a hand in your decision as to where you put him?
I mean, not as much, to be honest. West Virginia fans have buzzed about Garrett Green ever since he got on campus. And from what I've seen from him, I've been like, okay, the potential is there. Absolutely. And again, I think West Virginia is going to have a good offensive line this year. I would say top half of the Big 12. And so that should benefit him. I really like CJ Donaldson. Like, I know that fullback, I don't know why the Big 12 still keeps fullback as one of the positions on the preseason team. I use it as my 3rd running back, and I put CJ Donaldson there because I'm like, I need him on my all Big 12 team, because that's what I expect from him this year.
Thank you for that, because a lot of people he's not even getting mentioned by a lot of other folks out there.
I was like, there's other running backs I've got to put in there, but I needed him on there. So he's not a fullback, but you got to name the fullbacks in the Big 12, right, please. Yeah. Please. Like, I think there's pieces. I'm not saying there's no talent. This isn't some talentless G5 team. And I think Garrett Green has potential. But again, you're gonna start against Penn State on the road.
Yeah.
And then play Pitt in week 3, mm-hmm. and then a Texas Tech team that everybody's super high on at home, and then you go to TCU, and
we could be 1-5. There's no hiding. We could realistically be 1-5 going into our bye week.
And at that point, like, yes, it's nice that you have UCF, BYU, and Cincinnati on the back half of the schedule. And it's nice that you, in the season, let's see, you got BYU at home, at Norman, Cincinnati at home, at Baylor. And look, preseason polls be damned.
Right.
Okay. Every team who has made the Big 12 title game since it came back in 2017, not named Oklahoma, was picked like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th in the preseason poll. Mm-hmm. So the Big 12 is an absolute crapshoot. It is. And I understand all that. So, like, we're basing all our decisions off of preseason expectations. They may not mean anything.
Right.
Some of these teams could be better than we think. Like, BYU could be better because they're used to playing a tougher schedule on a
Mhm.
regular season. Oklahoma might make a big jump. They might not. Baylor may look more like the Big 12 championship team than the one who went 6-6 last year. Does Oklahoma State bounce back? I just like we have questions for every team. I just have the most concerns with West
Mhm.
Virginia. And I think also as people voting in this, like we're still familiarizing ourselves with West Virginia, with Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, and UCF. We've been trying to pay attention to them for the last few years, ever since it was announced they were coming to the Big 12. But we're still familiarizing ourselves with them, and so they are more of an unknown asset than West Virginia is.
Mhm.
We know West Virginia better, and so we have more, I don't know, stronger opinions in our negativity about West
Makes sense.
Virginia than we do about these four programs joining, who we just don't know what they're going to be like
Yeah,
in the Big
that
12.
and that's fair. That's very fair. Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard other Big 12 media folks say that they didn't even vote for that reason because they didn't know where to put these teams. So, and I'm not saying voting is right or wrong. That was just that one person's opinion, but I mean, it's like you said, it's a preseason poll. It really doesn't mean a whole lot anyway, other than for us to have this conversation.
Hey,
But,
it's
but
July. We got to have something to talk about.
exactly, that's what somebody the other day was like. It's a waste of time. I'm like, look, dude, it's the off season. Fans like to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it.
Right.
It's what I do.
we
Right?
got we got to generate content somehow, and y'all.
Yeah.
My whole thing with preseason polls is as long as you treat them appropriately, that's fine. They're for fun. They're content to fill the time before the season starts. They're staggered out over periods so that you can get excited in anticipation of the season. We've got Big 12 Media Days next week. That's going to be something. Lots of talking points and things that might not matter once the season starts, right?
Right.
If you when preseason polls set early beliefs in teams that aren't true, that's when I have a problem with preseason polls. Hey, congratulations, you beat preseason number 7 in week 1. Well, they finished 8-4, so am I supposed to think that you're good because you beat the
Yeah.
number 7 ranked team in the country, even though they're not that good? That's the kind of stuff that I get frustrated
Right.
with. If you're angry at a poll, it's just because it's because someone said something about your team that either confirms the negativity that you don't want to believe or is telling you your team's not as good as you think. And like, that's fine. Like, argue, have fun. Like, if you didn't have
Mhm.
any, if fans didn't have anything to argue about, like, we would just be like, so Bob Huggins, we still talk about that? Or you can be distracted by a 14th place pick in the
Right.
preseason Big 12 media poll.
Right. And that's a great point. I mean, uh, that's why I wanted you on here because I am probably looking at that, even though I try not to. I try to be as objective as possible, but it's hard sometimes. That's why I wanted somebody with an outside perspective to kind of keep me level headed and not let my judgment be clouded, so to speak.
I don't love the saying it's the hope that kills you. It's the false hope that kills you.
Mhm.
And I think for West Virginia fans, and I really, really hate it for West Virginia fans right now with everything that's happening with the basketball program. And I think everyone's ready to be done with Neal Brown. It's either have a great year and show us progress, or let's be done with this and go
And move on.
find something else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And between that and Huggins and the basketball program and like, I get it. And a good baseball season that was disappointing in the end, even though it was a really good year. Like, I get it for West Virginia fans. It's like, can we just have something to cling to this summer that feels positive? And that's hard. Like, I hate it. I think West Virginia is going to be, if not first, then one of the first to market this season.
Yeah. Well, and it's if we start 1-5, I'm sure that's what our fan base is going to be clamoring for at that point. I mean, even if we start 2-4 or whatever. I mean, especially if we lose to Pitt. Now, if we can beat Pitt, like you said earlier, he's gonna get a much longer leash. But losing to Pitt at home, I don't know one person that expects us to beat Penn State. So losing to Penn State,
No.
it is what it is.
If, in
But
my
that Pitt
opinion,
game is going to be critical in the future, in his future.
if he beats Pitt, in my opinion, unless you go out and just get blown out in your next couple Big 12 games, I mean, just like you're losing by 3 scores,
Mhm.
the team looks uncompetitive. If he beats Pitt, I think he buys himself until they're out of bowl eligibility.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
the
fair.
problem with that is, here's the question. Would you rather, if you're a West Virginia fan, beat Pitt, but have to wait till the end of the season for Neal Brown to get fired and for you to go hire a new coach, or lose to Pitt and get him fired quickly and be on the market
Man,
first?
wow, that's a tough question to answer because I don't know. I guess for me it depends on how the rest of the season goes. I mean, if we finish 6-6 and make a bowl game and beat Pitt, yeah, wait. But if
Is
we
that
beat Pitt and finish 4-8, maybe we should have lost to Pitt and moved on. It's hard for me to answer that.
I know. And even then, is 6-6 going to like make West Virginia fans like?
No, it's not.
If he does just enough to buy himself another season, is that good?
Well,
Do
that's
we need
what
to
I,
see any
and
more
that's
from
and
Neal
that's
Brown?
and that's what a lot of people have been talking about. Is it actually? I mean, I was talking to a guy about it last night, Josh Neighbors. You may know Josh
Yeah.
Neighbors from. He was mentioning it. He thinks it will take 8-4, 9, 8, 9, 10 wins for Neal Brown. In his opinion, a 7-win season is not enough because it just shows he's still average basically at that point. It's still
Yeah.
not in his opinion. Now, I personally think because I know West Virginia and how they operate, at least to a degree, based on history. 7-5, they're not firing him. I don't think.
7-5 in a bowl win. They owe him so much money. I'm not saying
Yeah,
I'm not trying to act like West Virginia's like broke, but like
yeah,
they owe him so much money.
right.
And
And let's be fair. Our NIL program is just now. We're now doing really well in the NIL landscape, and at least being competitive. And we weren't there 2 years ago. So knowing that, and if they see and he's still to be a coach on the hot seat, he's recruiting pretty darn well. He's not, you know, breaking any records, but he's recruiting just as good as any other coach we've had, if not a little better in some cases. But even now, I mean, you'd think by being on the hot seat, he wouldn't be able to get anybody. I mean, we've got 18 commits already for next year, including.
uh, I,
So
I think that gets overstated. I do, because the transfer portal allows you, if it doesn't work out, you can always just leave.
right,
Right.
good
So
point.
this is who I want to go play for. And if he gets fired,
I'll just leave.
I can go somewhere else.
Yeah,
Like, it'd be
yeah,
all right.
good,
Or
good point.
I just like it at West Virginia and I'd rather be here. So like I think the hot seat when it comes to recruiting is less impactful than it used to be. Now look, it is going to affect some kids who don't want to go somewhere that the head coach may not be there for long because they don't want to have to transfer. But there is now an option that didn't used to exist.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Phillip, I appreciate you coming on and crashing all hopes today.
Now I
No, in all honesty, though, I really appreciate your honesty and like I said, sometimes when you're even though I'm a podcaster slash YouTuber, I'm a fan at heart, so sometimes I need to be brought down to earth. But yeah, it's all fair, man. I totally understand it.
I love the Neal Brown hire when it happened. I am disappointed that it is not working
Always,
out.
and it's been baffling, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. I
He checks e
honestly,
he checks every box. He checks
I,
every single box we want in a coach except wins. That's it.
what screwed them over, I wholeheartedly believe, was not getting the quarterback right for 4 years.
Yeah,
I
that's a huge part of it.
who is and I can't think of his name. Who was the starter for 2 years and then left?
Jarrett Dagey.
The Daggy loyalty was baffling. Because I think that set them back.
Yeah, well, and the problem is, according to the coaches, we had nobody better than him behind him because Garrett Green, according to them, wasn't ready yet. So,
Yeah.
but there
The,
again, that's on them to recruit. Either get somebody out of the portal that is ready,
Mhm.
get your high school guy ready at a faster pace. Something. I mean, that all falls on to the coaching staff to make that happen. That is
eh,
one thing Dana Holgerson did really well here. People can say all they want to about Dana Holgerson. Even the couple years we didn't have, when we had Skylar Howard, fans hated Skylar Howard, complained all the time. But you know what the guy did? He won 10 football games
I'd rather have
because
Skylar Howard than Daggy.
Dana adjusted to what Skyler's strengths were and changed his offense based on what he had. Neal's not done that. I mean, he was still running RPO type stuff with Jarrett Daggy, who can't run at all. I mean, it just and I mean, obviously Neal Brown can coach me up one side and down the other.
Yeah.
But I mean,
that doesn't mean that our observations are inaccurate.
Correct. I mean, why would you run that when you have a quarterback that he's no threat at all? The defense, you think the defense is going to bite on him as a runner? No, not at all.
Not if they're worth anything.
So when they see that you don't hand the ball to the quarterback, they know, or the running back, they know it's a pass. Yeah. So, I mean, and they can tee off on you. So I don't know, man. It's I definitely agree the quarterback has been an issue. I think the lack of NIL funding early on could have been an issue potentially. We'll find out over, if that holds, if that improves. I mean, obviously we saw what the basketball team was able to do before the Huggins debacle.
Yep.
With NIL. So I think the NIL foundation is there now. So we'll see if Neal Brown's able to utilize it and get some wins out of it. So.
Absolutely. Well, here's hoping.
Yep. Well, Phillip, man, again, everybody go check Phillip out. He's runs the 10-12 podcast network. He does his own show, the 10-12 podcast, covers all the Big 12, and they have individual shows that cover most of the teams, and we'll soon have all the 14 teams covered. Raspy Voice Kids, most of you know, most of you West Virginia fans know the Raspy Voice Kids podcast is part of that network. Those guys do a fantastic job, so check their show out if you haven't. And Phillip, your Twitter handle's up there at 10 TEN 12, the number 12 network. Any other social media platforms that you want to promote?
I mean, we're on Instagram, we're on Threads at 1012 Pod, and we're on YouTube, 1012 Podcast as well. So you can check us out there. We've got some exclusive stuff. And I can't think of 3 better words to end this with than eat shit pit.
There you go. Now we're on the same page. Well, Phillip, thanks again, man. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. And Q Country Roads.